A wildlife researcher stumbled upon a desperate scene, a tiny wolf pup trapped in an illegal cage. Everyone told him to call authorities and walk away. But when the mother wolf returned, what happened next would challenge everything we thought we knew about these mysterious predators. This is a story of maternal instinct, unexpected trust, and a connection that transcends the divide between human and wild. Get ready for an extraordinary journey that will leave you speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Michael Collins hiked through the dense Wyoming forest, his research equipment weighing heavily in his backpack. At 32, he dedicated his career to studying wolf behavior in Grand Teton National Park, tracking their movements and documenting their hunting patterns. Today, he was following radio signals from a collared female wolf his team had been monitoring for nearly 3 years. The crisp October air carried the first hint of winter. As Michael paused to check his GPS coordinates, the signal indicated the wolf, known as F42 in research records but nicknamed Aspen by the team, should be somewhere in this valley. Yet there was no sign of her. Strange, Michael muttered, studying the signal strength. Aspen rarely deviated from her pack's territory, and never alone. Something was off. A faint whimpering sound caught his attention. Following the noise, Michael pushed through a dense thicket and froze at what he discovered in a small clearing. A crude metal cage trap sat partially hidden among fallen leaves. Inside, a tiny gray wolf pup, no more than 8 weeks old, pawed desperately at the metal bars. A poacher's trap, clearly. Illegal in national parks, and especially disturbing since wolf pups this young rarely ventured far from their pack. "Hey there, little one," Michael said softly, crouching to assess the situation. The pup retreated to the back of the cage, trembling. Michael's training was clear on protocol: document the scene, call park rangers, and wait for authorized personnel to handle wildlife. Interfering with even illegally trapped animals was against regulations, yet something about the pup's frightened eyes made his chest tighten. The trap looked recently set. The pup appeared uninjured but distressed, its tiny body quivering with fear and confusion. More concerning was the absence of the pack. Wolf pups were never left alone, which meant something had separated this little one from its family. Checking his GPS again, Michael realized with a start that the signal from Aspen's collar was moving rapidly toward his location. The pieces clicked into place. This was Aspen's pup. She hadn't abandoned it, she was searching for it. Michael backed away slightly, heart racing. An approaching wolf mother separated from her pup was potentially the most dangerous wildlife encounter possible. His training urged retreat, a call to rangers, careful documentation from a distance. Instead, Michael found himself reaching for his satellite phone, only to discover it had no signal in the deep valley. The decision before him became painfully clear. Leave to find reception, potentially abandoning the pup for hours, or take immediate action. The pup whined again, a sound so plaintive it seemed to cut through Michael's professional detachment. He thought of the poachers who might return, of predators that might be attracted to the trapped pup, of the dropping temperature as evening approached. "I must be crazy," he whispered, setting down his pack. With careful movements, Michael examined the cage. It was secured with a simple latch mechanism, designed to keep animals in but allow humans easy access. He could release the pup in seconds. The GPS tracker beeped again. Aspen was closing in fast. Michael made his decision. Against every protocol in his professional handbook, he reached for the cage latch. A twig snapped in the forest behind him. Michael turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood Aspen, her golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that froze him in place. Her posture was rigid, hackles slightly raised. A mother who had tracked her missing child and found a human beside it. In that moment, man and wolf assessed each other, both perfectly still except for the small puff of their breath in the cool autumn air. Between them, the pup whined softly from its cage, creating an impossible triangle of tension. What happened next would defy everything Michael thought he knew about wolf behavior. Michael remained perfectly still, his hands suspended above the cage latch. Aspen watched him from 20 feet away, her eyes never leaving his face. Years of research had taught Michael that wild wolves typically fled from humans. Yet maternal instinct had clearly overpowered Aspen's natural caution. "Easy," Michael whispered, barely audible. "I'm trying to help." The wolf's ears flicked at his voice. She took one step forward, then another, her movements deliberate but not aggressive. Michael fought his instinct to retreat. Any sudden movement now could trigger a defensive response. The pup whined again, pressing its nose against the cage bars toward its mother. Aspen's attention shifted momentarily to her offspring, giving Michael a precious second to assess the situation. He had 3 options: back away and leave both wolves, hoping rangers would arrive before poachers returned; continue with his plan to release the pup, risking Aspen's reaction; or retreat to a safe distance and observe. Science and safety protocols demanded the third option, but as he looked at the frightened pup and the distressed mother, Michael made a decision based on something beyond professional training. "I'm going to open the cage," he said in a calm, steady voice. "Your little one will be free in a moment." As if understanding his intent, Aspen stopped her advance but remained vigilant, her body tense. Moving with exaggerated slowness, Michael turned back to the cage. The latch was simple but required 2 hands to manipulate. With his back now partially to the wolf, vulnerability crawled up his spine. Every instinct screamed danger. The metal creaked as he worked the mechanism. Behind him, he heard a low growl, not immediately aggressive, but a clear warning. Michael's hands trembled slightly, but he continued, finally releasing the latch with a metallic click. "There we go," he breathed, swinging the cage door open. The pup, however, pressed itself further into the cage's back corner, too frightened to emerge. Michael glanced over his shoulder. Aspen had edged closer, now only 15 feet away. Her growl deepened. "Your move, little one," Michael said to the pup, carefully backing away from the open cage. For several tense moments, nothing happened. The pup remained frozen in fear while its mother maintained her vigilant stance. Michael continued his slow retreat until he reached a nearby tree, giving both wolves space. Then, with a sudden burst of courage, the pup darted from the cage. Instead of running directly to its mother, however, confusion or disorientation sent it scrambling in the wrong direction, away from both Aspen and Michael. Aspen's reaction was immediate. She bounded forward, straight past Michael, in pursuit of her pup. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, wolf and man were just feet apart as she passed. Michael could see the individual hairs of her coat, hear her breathing. Their eyes met for a split second, and Michael saw something that would challenge his scientific understanding. Recognition. Then she was past him, focused entirely on her offspring. With gentle efficiency, she caught up to the disoriented pup, nudging it with her nose to redirect its path. The pup responded immediately to its mother's guidance, falling in beside her. Michael expected them to disappear immediately into the forest. Instead, at the edge of the clearing, Aspen paused. With her pup safely beside her, she turned and looked directly at Michael once more. What passed between them in that moment transcended the traditional boundaries between human and wild. There was no gratitude. Wolves don't think in human terms. But there was something. An acknowledgement, perhaps. A momentary connection. Then they were gone, melting into the forest as silently as shadows. Michael released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his heart pounding in his chest. He had broken virtually every protocol in wildlife management, yet as he gathered his equipment, he couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. What he couldn't know, was that this encounter was only the beginning. 2 weeks passed after the cage incident. Michael documented the encounter in his personal journal, but filed an official report merely noting signs of poaching activity. Mentioning his direct interference would have triggered a disciplinary review and possible removal from the research project. Science demanded objectivity, not intervention. Autumn deepened across Grand Teton National Park. Michael continued his research, tracking wolf movements and behaviors, while trying to convince himself that the encounter with Aspen had been nothing extraordinary. Wolves were highly intelligent, yes, but the meaningful exchange he thought he'd experienced was likely just his own anthropomorphism, projecting human qualities onto animal behavior. Then came the morning that changed everything. Michael woke before dawn in his small cabin at the research station. As he stepped onto his porch with his first cup of coffee, his breath visible in the cold air, he noticed something unusual on the bottom step. A freshly killed rabbit. Michael stared at it, coffee forgotten in his hand. The rabbit showed no signs of decomposition. It had been placed there recently, and placed was the correct term. This was no random drop by a passing predator. It lay centered on the step, deliberately positioned. "Impossible," he whispered. Cautiously, Michael scanned the tree line surrounding his cabin. Nothing moved in the early morning stillness. He photographed the rabbit from multiple angles before carefully examining the ground around his cabin. There, in a patch of mud near the steps, he found what he was looking for: wolf tracks. Not just any wolf tracks, but a distinctive print pattern he recognized from Aspen's previous tracking data. And beside her tracks, smaller prints, her pup. Michael's scientific mind raced through rational explanations. Wolves sometimes cached food for later consumption. Perhaps this was simply a temporary storage spot. Yet the deliberate placement at his doorstep defied such simple explanations. For 3 consecutive mornings, the pattern repeated. Different offerings: a rabbit, a grouse, part of a deer haunch, all carefully placed on Michael's bottom step before dawn. Each time, the same tracks confirmed the visitors' identities. On the 4th morning, Michael was ready. He'd set up a wildlife camera overlooking his steps and stayed awake, watching through his window in the pre-dawn darkness. At 4:38 a.m., movement at the forest edge caught his attention. Aspen emerged from the trees, her pup following closely. In her mouth, she carried something, another rabbit. With deliberate movements, she approached the cabin, showing none of the caution wild wolves typically displayed near human dwellings. At the bottom step, she placed her offering carefully, then backed away several paces. The pup remained close to her side, clearly growing rapidly in the weeks since its rescue. Michael watched, barely breathing, as Aspen looked directly toward his window. Though he knew she couldn't see him in the darkened interior, her gaze seemed to find him unerringly. She held the position for several seconds before turning, leading her pup back toward the forest. The footage from his camera confirmed what he had witnessed. When he showed it to Dr. Linda Ramirez, the project's lead biologist, her reaction was immediate and intense. "This behavior is unprecedented," she said, replaying the video for the 3rd time. "Deliberate gift-bringing to humans? It contradicts everything we understand about wild wolf behavior." "What should we do?" Michael asked. Linda's scientific curiosity overrode her skepticism. "Document everything, but tell no one else yet. If this continues..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood the implications. Wolf behavior was well studied, their avoidance of humans well documented. What they were witnessing suggested something that would challenge fundamental assumptions about wolf cognition and human-wildlife relationships. What neither of them could anticipate was how much further this extraordinary connection would develop, or what it would eventually mean for their understanding of the creatures they had spent their careers studying from a careful scientific distance. Winter descended on Grand Teton National Park with unforgiving intensity. Snow blanketed the landscape, temperatures plummeted, and wildlife struggled in the harsh conditions. Michael continued his research, now with special attention to Aspen and her growing pup. The gifts had continued intermittently through November, then stopped as winter tightened its grip. GPS tracking showed Aspen had rejoined her pack, integrating her pup into the family unit. Michael tried to convince himself the unusual behavior had been a temporary anomaly, interesting data, nothing more. Then came the December blizzard that changed everything again. Michael had been collecting data from remote sensors when the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Visibility dropped to near zero as howling winds drove snow horizontally across the landscape. His planned 2-hour hike back to the research station quickly became a desperate struggle for survival. Disoriented in the whiteout conditions, Michael realized he had strayed from the trail. His radio produced only static. As temperatures plummeted further, the danger of hypothermia grew with each passing minute. Finding partial shelter behind a rock formation, Michael assessed his situation with growing concern. His emergency kit contained a space blanket and fire starter, but in these winds, fire was impossible. If he couldn't find his way back before nightfall, his chances of survival would diminish rapidly. As daylight faded, an eerie sound cut through the storm's roar, wolves howling close by. Michael's research had taught him that wolves rarely pose danger to humans, but in these extreme conditions, with hunger driving desperate behavior, all bets were off. The howling grew closer. Through the curtain of snow, dark shapes appeared. 1, then 3, then 5 wolves materializing like ghosts in the storm. Michael pressed himself against the rock, survival instincts screaming. The largest wolf approached directly, and with a jolt of recognition, Michael identified Aspen. She came within 10 feet, her golden eyes reflecting what little light remained. Behind her, her pack formed a semicircle, including her now nearly adolescent pup. Aspen, Michael whispered, the name escaping before he could consider the absurdity of addressing a wild wolf. To his astonishment, she responded to her name with a slight tilt of her head. Then she did something extraordinary. She turned and began walking slowly away, stopping to look back at him with unmistakable intent. The message seemed clear. Follow. Every scientific protocol and survival guide advised against following predators, especially in near darkness during a blizzard. Yet Michael found himself making a decision based on something beyond rational thought. He followed. The wolf pack moved with confidence through the blinding snow, forming a loose circle around Michael. Aspen led, occasionally glancing back as if checking his progress. When he stumbled in a deep drift, she paused, waiting for him to regain his footing. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 40 minutes, lights appeared ahead, the research station. Somehow, the wolves had led him directly back to safety when all his human skills and technology had failed. At the edge of the cleared area surrounding the station, the pack stopped. Michael continued forward several paces before realizing they had gone. Turning back, he caught a final glimpse of Aspen watching from the tree line before she and her pack vanished into the storm. Inside the station, Dr. Ramirez and the team had been preparing a search party, alarmed by Michael's failure to return. "How did you find your way back in this?" Linda demanded, helping him remove his ice-crusted gear. Michael hesitated only briefly before telling the truth. "Aspen's pack led me." The silence that followed was broken only by the howling wind outside. Then Linda spoke, her voice careful. "Led you?" Deliberately. "Yes." The implications hung in the air between them. Wild wolves had not only recognized a specific human, remembered a past interaction, but had apparently made a collective decision to guide that human to safety. Behavior so far beyond established understanding of wolf cognition that it bordered on the impossible. Yet the evidence was standing before them, alive because of it. "We need to rethink everything," Linda said finally. As the storm raged outside, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the moment Aspen had appeared in the blizzard. It wasn't just that she had recognized him. It was the deliberate intent behind her actions, almost as if she had been searching for him. The question no one dared voice aloud was why. Why would a wild wolf and her pack risk their own safety to help a human? The answer would emerge in the coming days, and it would be more extraordinary than any of them could have imagined. January brought new snowfall and a breakthrough discovery. Linda's team had been monitoring unusual wolf movements near a restricted area of the park when they identified the cause. Illegal hunters had established a hidden camp, targeting elk and, disturbingly, wolves themselves. Park rangers were notified, but jurisdiction complications and the remote location meant enforcement would take days to organize. Meanwhile, GPS data showed Aspen's pack moving dangerously close to the hunter's location. "We can't interfere," Linda reminded the team during an emergency meeting. "Document everything, but wildlife management protocols are clear." Michael nodded agreement, though something inside him rebelled at the thought of Aspen or her pack facing armed poachers. Later that night, alone in his cabin, he made a decision that would shatter his professional boundaries once and for all. He would warn the wolves. The idea was absurd, contrary to everything scientific training taught about wildlife management. Yet the connection he'd experienced with Aspen transcended conventional understanding. Something deeper than science was at work here. Before dawn, Michael hiked to a ridge overlooking the valley where Aspen's pack had last been tracked. The morning was clear and bitterly cold, the sky still scattered with stars. Finding a position downwind, Michael waited. As first light touched the mountain peaks, movement in the valley below caught his attention. The wolf pack emerged from the trees, moving purposefully across the snow. Michael counted 7 wolves, including Aspen and her now nearly grown pup. Using his knowledge of their patterns, Michael positioned himself ahead of their projected path. When they appeared again, he stood in plain sight on a rise, a clear violation of observation protocols that demanded invisibility. The pack froze at his appearance. For several tense moments, wolves and human regarded each other across the snowy distance. Then Aspen stepped forward from the group, her posture alert but not aggressive. "The hunters are that way," Michael said, pointing toward the hidden camp, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping somehow to communicate his warning. Aspen watched him intently, her intelligent eyes fixed on his face. Then, in a gesture that defied explanation, she changed direction, leading her pack away from the danger zone Michael had indicated. That evening, reviewing GPS data, Linda confronted him. The pack completely altered their territory circuit today, almost as if they were... She hesitated, then finished reluctantly. "Warned." Michael met her gaze steadily. Maybe they were. The admission hung between them, a breach of scientific protocol so significant it could end Michael's career. Yet Linda's response surprised him. "I've spent 30 years studying wolves," she said slowly. "I've published dozens of papers on their behavior patterns. And yet..." She gestured to the tracking data. "What's happening here challenges everything we thought we knew." Over the following weeks, a remarkable pattern emerged. Through careful positioning and simple gestures, Michael found he could communicate basic information to Aspen, primarily warnings about danger zones. The wolf seemed to interpret and respond to these warnings, adjusting her pack's movements accordingly. Park rangers eventually apprehended the illegal hunters, but not before confirming they had already killed 2 wolves from a neighboring pack. Aspen's family remained safe, protected by an unprecedented alliance that crossed species boundaries. Word of this extraordinary relationship spread cautiously through the scientific community. Most dismissed it as anthropomorphism or coincidence. A few, however, recognized the implications, that wolf intelligence and adaptive behavior might be far more sophisticated than previously understood. For Michael, the theoretical debates mattered less than the reality he experienced. He had moved beyond being merely an observer of these remarkable creatures. He had become, in some small way, connected to them. The true depth of that connection would reveal itself on a frigid February morning, when Aspen's pack faced a threat no human warning could prevent. and the boundaries between observer and observed would dissolve completely. The February day dawned clear and brutally cold. Michael was reviewing data in the research station when urgent beeping from the tracking system caught his attention. Aspen's GPS collar was transmitting distress signals, rapid movement followed by stationary position, indicating possible injury. Without waiting for authorization, Michael gathered emergency supplies and headed toward her location. Dr. Ramirez called after him. Protocol states— I know what protocol states, Michael interrupted. But this is Aspen. The meaning was clear to both of them. This wasn't just any research subject. This was a wolf that had formed an unprecedented connection with humans, with Michael specifically. He found her 2 miles from the station, alone except for her now adolescent pup. The problem was immediately apparent. Aspen had broken through thin ice on a partially frozen stream. Though she had managed to pull herself out, her hind leg was clearly injured, and in the sub-zero temperature, her wet fur was already freezing. The pup paced anxiously nearby, occasionally approaching its mother before retreating again. Standard wildlife management protocol was absolute: never intervene with injured adult predators. The risks were extreme, both to human safety and to the natural selection processes that maintained healthy wild populations. Yet as Michael watched Aspen struggle to rise, only to collapse again on the snow, he knew he couldn't simply document her suffering and leave. In these temperatures, with that injury, she would not survive the night. Michael approached slowly, speaking in low, even tones. "I'm going to help you," he said, "but you have to let me." Aspen's head turned toward his voice. Recognition flickered in her golden eyes. She made no move to retreat or display aggression as he drew near, behavior so contrary to wild wolf instincts that it reinforced the extraordinary nature of their connection. The pup was more cautious, retreating to watch from a safe distance. Kneeling beside her, Michael assessed the injury. The leg wasn't broken but badly wrenched, and the immediate danger was hypothermia from her ice-soaked fur. Working quickly, he dried what he could with an emergency blanket, then applied a heating pack to her core body area. Most remarkable was Aspen's cooperation. She remained still, watching Michael work with an intelligence that seemed to comprehend his intentions. When her condition stabilized, Michael faced a difficult decision. Leaving her here meant likely death. Taking her to the research station meant crossing every professional boundary and risking his career. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. Using the emergency transport sled he'd brought, Michael carefully moved Aspen. Throughout the journey back, her pup followed at a distance, unwilling to approach but equally unwilling to abandon its mother. Dr. Ramirez's face when Michael arrived with a wild wolf on a sled spoke volumes. "This violates every protocol we have," she said, though she immediately helped bring Aspen into the facility's treatment room. "I know," Michael replied simply. For 3 days, they treated Aspen's injury while maintaining minimal human contact to preserve her wild instincts. Throughout this time, her pup remained close to the station, occasionally visible through the windows, waiting. On the 4th morning, Aspen was strong enough to return to the wild. The team transported her to a release site near where her pack had last been tracked. Before opening the transport cage, Michael knelt briefly beside it. "Take care of yourself," he said softly. When released, Aspen emerged cautiously. She paused, looking back at Michael with that same unnerving intelligence he'd first recognized months ago. Then she gave a single, low howl. From the forest came an answering chorus, her pack, including her pup, who bounded into view, reuniting with its mother in a flurry of greeting behaviors. What happened next became the subject of scientific papers, documentaries, and endless debate about wolf cognition. Instead of immediately rejoining her pack, Aspen approached Michael one final time. She stopped just 3 feet away, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her eyes. Then she lowered her head and briefly pressed her forehead against his knee before turning to lead her family, including her now grown pup, back into the wild that was their home. That gentle contact, a gesture no wild wolf had ever been documented making with a human, represented something profound. Not domestication or taming, but something perhaps more meaningful: recognition across the species divide, an acknowledgement that sometimes the boundaries we create between human and wild are more permeable than we imagine. In the years that followed, Aspen's pack thrived in Grand Teton National Park. They maintained their wild nature, hunting and living according to patterns established long before humans studied them. Yet, whenever Michael worked in their territory, the pack allowed his presence with a tolerance extended to no other human. The pup, now grown into a strong young wolf, eventually formed its own pack. Researchers noted with interest that this new family showed none of the typical avoidance behaviors toward the research team's observation posts. It was as if Aspen had passed down not just genes but knowledge, the understanding that not all humans were threats. This legacy of trust between species became Michael's most important discovery, one that transcended data points and research papers. It suggested that the divide between human and wild might not be as fixed or absolute as science had believed, that with respect and compassion, connections could form that changed both the observer and the observed. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories about the incredible bonds that can form between humans and wildlife. Help us spread the message that with patience and respect, we can bridge even the wildest divides.